Hello and welcome to the SpeakEasy. My name is Paul Feesey and I am joined by
Morgan Locke. Hello.
Hello, good to have you with me. It's
Long time no see.
It has been a long time, hasn't it? Because we've been on kind of various different projects the last few weeks, haven't we? So I think Glenn and I, neither Glenn nor I were here last week.
No,
we were
banished
in our own
you
home. Yes,
from the studio.
Yeah, because you were all in here. Because you may notice that our surroundings are a little bit different to what we've been in before.
SpeakEasy's in space.
SpeakEasy in space.
Yes,
yeah.
We were filming a little short film called Good Morning Sasha, which is hopefully going to be a part of a series of short films and teaching that we're going to put out sometime next year, which is kind of the 3-2-1 material that Glenn's been developing over about a decade now. We're going to put that out again.
Yep.
With some short films to help illustrate what Glenn's talking about. So
brilliant.
That's all that.
And
this is the set. Look at it. There's a space door. Who could come through that door? Anyone at any time. Let us know if they do.
Yeah. So it was all happening in here last week. So it was actors hired in from outside and everything, wasn't it? So quite a professional kind of thing going on.
We managed to pull off a professional feel,
which will not be a
days.
surprise to viewers of the SpeakEasy and our work. They will know us as the consummate professionals that we always are. So
that's right.
Anyway, we're now back here. We're doing the SpeakEasy again. So Nate, tell us a little bit about what we think about today.
So, having now finished a kind of fairly long series of looking at the church calendar and various events within the church calendar, and looking at Trinity last week because it was Trinity Sunday yesterday. We're into ordinary time.
Ordinary time.
So now we've just got to think, well, what do we ordinarily think about? Well, ordinarily we also think about the gospel, but not necessarily in the way that we had before. But I was preaching at a baptism service yesterday. It was a great celebration. And because the family of those who were being baptized asked me, can we pick a passage of the Bible that's really going to help to reach out to people with the good news of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so they gave me the parable of the Prodigal Son from Luke 15. So that's what I thought we'd have a look at today, with the kind of frame around it that this is, I think, shares a lot of similarities with Where the Wild Things Are, Maurice Sendak's 1963 children's book.
Okay. Do you want to put a bit of meat on that bone? Okay. Because, I've not read the book.
Have you not read Where the Wild Things Are?
No. I don't think so.
But you've got young children. What do you read them if you're not reading them Where the Wild Things Are?
We literally just read Leviticus.
Gets them to sleep, I suppose. Where the Wild Things Are, I'm sure lots of the viewers will know that it is an absolute kind of classic children's picture book, possibly the classic. It's an American book from, as I say, 1963. And it tells the story of this little boy called Max, and it begins with, the night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another. And it shows this little boy called Max who's sort of playing up around the house. And his mother called him Wild Thing. So Max said, "I'll eat you up." So he was sent to bed without eating anything. And that very night in Max's room, a forest grew. I'm actually going to just basically...
Just do the whole thing.
I know the whole thing. That night in Max's room, a forest grew and grew and grew until his ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max. And he sailed off in and out of weeks and almost over a year, until he came to the place where the wild things are. And when he came to the place where the wild things are, they gnashed their terrible teeth, they roared their terrible roars, they rolled their terrible eyes, and they showed their terrible claws, till Max said, "Be still," and tamed them with the magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once. And the wild things were terrified, and they called him the most wild thing of all, and made him king of all wild things. And so Max says, "Now let the wild rumpus start." And then you get these three, we can show this on the screen, but these three double-page spreads of the wild rumpus, and they're howling at the moon, and they're swinging through the trees, and they're marching through and kind of singing a song. And then Max says, "Be still." And Max said stop, and then the wild things, he sends them off to bed without their supper. And suddenly Max is lonely and wants to be where someone loved him best of all. And he smells good things from around the world. And so he gave up being king of where the wild things are. And he sailed back on his boat in and out of weeks, until he came to the night of his very own room, where he found his supper waiting for him. And it was still hot. So the structure of that story is of a little boy who rebels against his mother and then goes off to this crazy wild place where the wild things are, has a wild rumpus, but then very quickly becomes disillusioned with it. It fails to satisfy. And so in his coming to his senses, he thinks, well, maybe I should go back. And going back, he discovers grace. That his supper is waiting for him. And I've always thought that was incredibly similar in terms of structure to the first half of Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. So when I was preaching yesterday, I actually read out the whole, just similar to what I've just done now, but read out the whole of Where the Wild Things Are without introduction. So slightly, few people a bit confused, like, what's this guy doing? And just great to sort of think, well, okay, that story is so familiar to us, and you'll know with children's stories, you read them over and over and over again because they like the repetition. And so I think, well, why does that one connect with people? Well, I think because it echoes the story of the prodigal with some interesting missing parts. So there's no father in it. There's no explicit reference. There's no older brother. So there's all sorts of things that are missing, but the heart of it, this sense of the prodigal, the wild thing who goes off and comes back home, is a very important story because it's the story that so many of us have from the gospel.
So it's like a shadow of the stories this bigger story we know.
Yeah, and because it doesn't focus on the father, as we'll see in Luke 15, it doesn't have that character sort of explicitly displayed for us. It's therefore it's a Christian, not quite, I suppose maybe it's a Christian heresy. It's the story with the really Christian bit kind of taken out. And we've just kind of tried to live with the consequences of a Christian understanding, a Christian approach to grace and forgiveness and welcome home. But yeah, and I also sort of mentioned in the sermon yesterday that Finding Nemo, it actually shares some similarities. You must have seen Finding Nemo.
No, I've never heard of it.
So Finding Nemo is interesting because it is basically the errant son swims off the drop-off, goes and touches the boat, and then gets kind of carried off to Sydney. And then the father who pursues him, right? That's going to be the heart of the prodigal son, as we'll see. Now, interestingly, what does Pixar do with that father character? They make him overly anxious. They make him overcautious. They make him a real warrior. And his character arc over the course of the journey, of the story, is to become more comfortable with the scary world around him. Whereas that, in lots of ways, even though he's very dynamic, the father in the prodigal son is moving. He's the one who goes out to find and seek and save the lost. He's actually a flat character at one level because he doesn't change in the process of the story. Whereas the prodigal son clearly does. The elder brother doesn't. He sort of remains quite static as a character. Whereas when Pixar do their father going after his son, they're kind of wrestling with their own sort of paternal or parental anxiety. And so that's what's being played back to the audience. This is what it looks like. Anyway, we've talked for ages about stuff that isn't actually the prodigal son. Maybe we should.
Yeah. So I think you unpacked it in sort of three ways. You've got the younger son, the father, and the older brother.
Yeah.
So do you want to unpack a bit about each of those characters?
Yeah.
The scripture itself?
So I mean, you've got the three main characters who are the which are given to us in Luke 15 in verse 11. We're introduced to all three of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a man who had two sons.
Yeah. So this is a story about father and sons, and then verse 12: the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided up his property between them. And it was interesting. We talked about this as a team earlier on, as we're thinking about what we're going to discuss this evening. And one of the things that came out was the sense of insult that desire for your inheritance is. It basically says, "I wish you were dead."
Yep.
So the younger brother is saying to his father, "I don't want you, I want the stuff you can give me." It's a bit like sort of treating your parents like the sort of Amazon delivery guy, right? "Thank you, close the door, goodbye. I never want to see you again." Well, I only want to see you, Amazon delivery guy, when you're bringing me my next parcel.
Well, mine just runs away before I even get to the doors.
Just leaves it and throws it over the fence. So yeah, in terms of that sense of, I want the stuff, but I don't want you. Actually, when Glenn did the anti-senti renti, lots of people have that view of God, in fact, where they want the stuff that God gives them, but they don't want God to be around. He's here to pour out some blessings and then to leave, but we don't want him sticking around over Christmas Day. And so the younger one, verse 12, as he's saying, "Give me my share of the estate," he is saying, I want you dead. Because you're only worth something to me dead. As alive, you're actually standing in the way of my inheritance. So we looked at the younger son and his determination for freedom. He wants to take what he has, verse 13, and get together all he has, set off for a distant country, to go to the land where the wild things are and squander his wealth in wild living. And to have a wild rumpus, right? That's what he wants. He wants the party. He wants to, stay up late into the night. He wants to just spend money, live for the moment. There are lots of other ways that you could go away and take the father's inheritance, and you could go and start your own business, try and start a separate empire, right? You could go and invest, and he went and worked hard and sort of invested all his father's income, and then you could have other problems where you don't reflect the heart of the father. But then here, this guy, it's just all about, it's the squandering of the wealth. It's that the money is just going to keep being spent until it's all gone. And then after he spent everything, there's a severe famine in the whole country. So in a way, the land around him reflects his own financial status. So as he kind of drops out and becomes impoverished, so too is the country around him. There is just a complete lack of understanding of the world to think, oh, okay, we're just going to go and spend and spend and spend, and there's no sense in which it can be sustainable. Whereas presumably the father, who is a party guy himself, as we'll see when we get back, he has great wealth, but how has he maintained that? Well, he's maintained that because he's not squandering it. He's generous, clearly, as we'll see, but that's a very different thing. So the son who goes after freedom very quickly finds himself in chains. So verse 15, he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. So he wanted independence. He's now dependent on this being a hired worker. And maybe he's going to get enough money. Probably won't, because he longs to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs are eating. So his journey is one that goes, it's sort of a firework, burns brightly, big party, and then suddenly it's all gone, and he's just left like looking up to the pigs, jealous of pigs. He's sort of debased himself. He's become low. So that's the younger son who, and his initial sort of act, if you like. That's the sort of the first act of the drama. Verse 17 then, and a lot of people want this to be the sort of the hinge part of the story. I don't think it really is, because I think it's not entirely obvious what will happen as a result of verse 17. It doesn't guarantee the outcome. It may have an impact, but it doesn't guarantee it. Verse 17, when he came to his senses, he says, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. So at that point, he starts to kind of plan out a route out of his situation. And it's a plan that involves a kind of, I need to acknowledge my status. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, right? I'm saying what I've done is bad. And what is it that I could reasonably expect if I behave myself from now on? I think so many of us, when we find ourselves, sitting in the consequences of our own sin, we do that same thing. We have this process in which we say, all right, God, here's how I'll now behave. If I pledge myself to good behavior from now on, will you let me come in at a lower level? And we start to sort of bargain, and we start to just basically plan for the way in which we're going to get back into favor. And then, as we'll see, that plan basically is just completely ignored. It's just sort of.
It's interesting you say, like, some people want that to be the hinge, and I suppose that it'd be easy to preach it, wouldn't it, as kind of, you need to make the choice to come back, just like he makes the choice. But actually, when he makes the choice, he's not coming back knowing that he's coming back into the open arms of the Father. He's coming back thinking, well, at best, I might be a hired servant who can do some stuff like that. So, I can see. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That often that might be. I mean, and Glenn's quite big on that, isn't he? The sort of where the emphasis is placed on you making a decision to come back, whereas actually, maybe we want to see more emphasis on the character of the Father in this, which I guess you kind of go on to.
Yeah, we do move on to. I mean, when I'm doing it, I think partly because I want to leave. Because in one sense, if I just want the story to stand by itself, just read the story. Just read out the prodigal son. And in a way, that's how Jesus sort of preaches it, is literally just to read the story. I think when you're stepping back from it a little bit and you're kind of analyzing it, or you're helping people to see some of the parts they might have otherwise missed, I do prefer, and I chose to yesterday, to take younger brother first, then elder brother, then father. Because then, in a way, that you can use that proclamation of what the Father's like, declaration of the Father's goodness, as the one who embraces both younger brother, the rebel, and the righteous, the elder brother as well. So looking at the elder brother, it means helpful, and lots of people sort of point this out, and it's important to, I think, if you're preaching a passage, to see it in its context. This is clearly the third parable being spoken to the same audience, which you can see the audience in 15 verses 1 and 2. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering round to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable, and that's the parable of the lost sheep, lost coin. Verse 11, Jesus continued, third parable. So this third one then, we still have to have in our minds these two audiences that are standing before Jesus: the tax collectors and sinners, and then the Pharisees and teachers of the law.
Yep.
And both of these are groups that, they won't mix. The Pharisees and teachers of the law who make a comment in verse 2, their comment is that Jesus ought not to be eating and welcoming these people. And so when you then look at the parable of the prodigal son, you see those two groups being played back to you very, very clearly. And younger brother representing these tax collectors and sinners, and then the older brother as representative of the kind of Pharisaical mindset, the religious teachers of the law. So, the elder brother, if we just kind of look at him, that's from verse 25, yeah. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. So before we get to what the father does in response, it's important to see that there are some, in fact there are many, who find the gross sins of the culture to be abhorrent to them. They would never behave in these sorts of atrocious ways that the younger brother does. They are very moral people. They're ethical. They're upstanding. They keep their noses clean and their bedrooms tidy. They're good people, and they actually pride themselves on their righteousness. Thank you that I'm not like these other people. And in a way, because we understand we have a holy God, we think, well, therefore, if I'm holy enough, I get in. My righteousness gets me in. And the problem is his righteousness keeps him out. So it's because he's so righteous, because he's such a good person, because he is so aware of how he hasn't behaved in the ways that this younger brother has, that's what keeps him from celebrating. That's what actually keeps him away from the party and away from the celebration. And I think there's so many ways that people do that. When we're called not to, we're called to flee from sexual immorality and abstain from sin, and we're called into a righteous life. But so often our concept of what a righteous life is simply avoiding the ne'er-do-wells and the sinners, and keeping a kind of pristine righteousness, which it is hilariously false. Like, you can't do that. You all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So you're denying the truth when you do insist that you have behaved yourself and have done everything, but also assuming that Christianity is about behavior or is about rule keeping, which I think is within the culture to some degree, misses the heart of what Jesus is saying here, because of course this is the son who remains outside and is just angry on the outside.
And it's interesting, isn't he, how in our discussion earlier it came up, the older son's response when he talks about the younger brother is not to talk about the younger brother, but to refer to him as this son of yours. It's like, well, this has nothing to do with me. And I just think, it's one of those things that's so easy to kind of skip over, isn't it? But it just shows the kind of pure, almost contempt for that person, what they've done. To say, like, even though they are, in this case, they're physically blood, like, well, they're nothing. This is no brother of mine. And I guess it's a very pointed description given you've got the tax collectors and the sinners, and you've got the Pharisees and the religious teachers. It's very, very strong, isn't it? What Jesus is saying here.
And yes, just the way in which the sharp end of the parable comes to the Pharisees and tax collectors, who are too good to welcome tax collectors and sinners, and they're actually condemning Jesus for his approach towards sinners. That he is the friend of sinners, the one who approaches the unclean, the one who reaches out his hand to touch the leper, the one who goes to seek and save the lost. They're saying that is not what you should do. A godly attitude would be to remain in kind of splendid isolation, not sullied by the filth of the world and embroiled in the issues of sin. That there's a kind of self-preservation at play there for them.
And interesting as well that the older brother says, all these years I've been slaving for you, and you never disobeyed your orders, you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. So the view, the relation, the way the elder son views his relationship with the father is one of slavery. It's a transactional, like, you've never given me anything. So, there's it's not a kind of thing where you go, oh, here's a son and a father who are in this good place with each other. This son has as much contempt for his father. Because he said, well, where's all the stuff I can get from you? Where's even the young goat? And the irony, of course, is the father saying, well, you're always here and everything I have is yours anyway. And
what is his situation? His situation in verse 28 is the elder brother became angry and refused to go in. So you're embittered and alone, right? You're isolated. You sort of cut yourself off from the fellowship of the father and the younger brother and of the household. And so your Christian life, if you're living in this way, is not one that's marked by joy. So it's fascinating when you look at where's the bit in Galatians, where Paul's talking to them about their desire to get sort of circumcised rather than just trusting in the fact that Christ was circumcised or cut off for them. And he just says, where is it? What has happened to all your joy? Such a great question. Someone's probably shouting at their screen right now exactly what the verse is. But basically, Paul, when he's writing to the Galatians, is saying that joy in the Christian life is actually quite a nice indicator of whether you are living through grace, through Christ, through faith, or whether you're living by your own righteousness. Because once you start to think that it's your relationship with God is I've been slaving for you, I've always obeyed your commands, right? That you won't have any joy in that. It's joyless. It's joyless. It's drudgery. It's servitude. Whereas what comes from grace, what comes from the gospel, and knowing that my righteousness is that which is given to me by Christ, that brings joy. That brings relief. That brings joyful service. And you will then be part of the party. You'll be at the heart of the party because you'll be celebrating that others have received the grace that you've received. Whereas if you think, no, this is about performance, and kind of we're competing for this. And part of his frustration is we were competing, I was winning, and yet somehow you get to get the fattened calf. So the frustration, I think, of the older brother is largely due to his self-righteous attitude, and that tends not to flourish in joy, but it tends to sort of diminish. You'll be a smaller, a weakened, and just miserable. You will be a miserable Christian if you're living like this. That's not to sort of talk about other reasons why people might, be weeping or mourning or grieving,
of course,
or lamenting anything, but to say that for many people, their Christian life is leading them into increased frustration and bitterness and cynicism, rather than is expressed in joy.
And so you've touched on the older brother a bit there. And then you like to round off with the father. Yeah, so I like to sort of finish with the father, just because I think then you get to appeal with the voice of the father much more as in the sermon. So it's to sort of say, well, what does this father do? What's the character of this father? As I said, I don't think the hinge is 17. I think it's a significant part of what's going on, but I think the real question that we should have, and as the original audience would have had, and as an audience who are not so soaked in this kind of thing that Maurice Sendak writes, Where the Wild Things Are, when we come to this, we get to verse 20, and this is the question. The hinge point is what's going to happen in verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. And then we get this kind of, it sort of cuts off. But while he was still a long way off, we think, oh, what's going to happen now? His father sent out, armed guards to shoot him. Or you brought disgrace upon my family and my name. I always remember the curate of our church saying he read this with his children, like this picture storybook, and in the storybook you see the father standing there, like sees the son far off. He's standing there with his stick, and the curate said to his son, what do you think that the father's going to do? And he said he's going to go and hit him with his stick.
Yeah, and he has every right to do, right? So whilst he was still a long way off, verse 20, the question is, what is he going to do? So if you're presenting this or reading this or filming this, what is it that you're going to be raising the stakes on and raising the expectations on? It's going to be, all right, now the plan of the son, we're going to see whether it works out. Will his father,
this is the moment, make or break,
accept him as a hired hand? They're the only two options we kind of have at the moment. Yes, I'll take you on as a hired hand, and we'll see how you get on. Probationary period of 6 months, and then we'll review. Potential for promotion over a 5-year period, right? Either that's, or he's going to say no. They're the only two options. And yet the grace option, the option that this father expresses, is verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. And when Jesus is showing us what God's like, he's saying, the categories you've kind of worked out for yourself to be reinstated after gross sin or after any kind of rebellion are so ridiculous compared to what God has for you. The embrace of the Father, the kiss of the Father, the clothing of the robe and the sandals and the this is the Father taking him like beyond his expectations. It's not worth imagining. You can't even imagine what the Father has in store for those of us who have returned to him. And he's active, he's out there, he's seeking, he sees him whilst a long way off, and then overwhelms him. I've used the image of like a little kind of tower of Jenga. Other stacking blocks are available. Jenga blocks, like to get like the little wooden blocks all tiled up, and they look kind of wobbly. And this is our sort of attempt, like, oh, maybe if I'm sorry enough, and if I just do this, and if I promise not to do it again, and I change my attitude with this, now next week's going to be different. And we have this very fragile kind of argument to plea. Our plea is this. And the wave of the Father's compassion just knocks it flying and just overwhelms us, not with a slightly nuanced kind of version of what we'd given, but with the gospel of grace, with Christ given for us, with grace and mercy poured out in abundance. And that's what we see. And then he says, Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. The celebration of heaven. There will. What's that great line? There is. We've got it in the other ones as well. Yeah, rejoice with me, and be glad. I have found my lost sheep. Verse 7 of chapter 15. I tell you, in the same way, there'll be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. And then verse 10 again. The same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So the heart of God's action in welcoming us in is that he celebrates. He is singing. He is rejoicing. He is, if you like, dancing. The Father, Son, and Spirit in that. I think the perichoresis. Yeah. So their mutual indwelling is that they're welcoming in, and before the angels are watching. The angels are seeing this kind of joy and delight of Father, Son, and Spirit as the sinners repent, as people come gathered home. It's time to celebrate. And that's what he does. And so then when the older brother removes himself or keeps himself at a distance from the celebration, what does the father do then? Well, the father actually, I will leave this place and then go out to you. His father went out to him, verse 28, and pleaded with him. Come in, come on. It's time to celebrate, join us. And because this is the heart of the father of the prodigal, and the heart of the father of the elder brother too, is he wants to gather in, his two sons. He wants them to feast and celebrate. So yeah, and then the final bit, I suppose, that we looked at is, well, what about justice? Who,
right?
Surely, are we saying just sin doesn't matter? God doesn't care about. He used to maybe care about sin.
Just come back.
He's not bothered about it. No, he's not really interested. And if we say the without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness of sins. We have a whole sacrificial system which is being taught to us in Leviticus, and do these things not matter? Well, you could speak to the fattened calf, and he might have something to say about that. And interesting, it's mentioned 3 times. Verse 23, the father says it, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Verse 27, the servant says it, your brother has come and your father has killed the fattened calf. And then verse 30, the older brother says it, when this son of yours who squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him. So 3 times we're told about this fattened calf.
Yeah.
And on one hand, it's like, great, now's the time to celebrate. Now's the time to bring out the calf that had been fattened, especially for such a time as this. Or just the reporting of that's what's happened. And then when the older brother says it, he's basically saying, I thought we were saving that for something good. Well, this is a complete waste.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a waster, so I don't know why we're celebrating. This is the kind of thing that you would, like, for someone who'd done the right thing, we were properly celebrating. The father says, no, this is kind of the purpose for which the calf was fattened over the months. So I think that actually does point us to, in some ways, to Christ as the fattened calf, as the one whose body is broken, that there might be feasting, that there might be a celebration for the church, that the death of the eternal Son is not wasted on sinners, but is the very reason why he came. He's not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And so when we then see Christ dying later on in Luke 23, and he has these criminal right and left different attitudes towards him. And his final line, today you'll be with me in paradise, is that kind of, we're going to feast. It is time to feast and celebrate, because through my seeking and saving the lost, you can be brought in.
Wow, I mean, lots of great stuff in there. Very encouraging.
Yes.
Challenging as well.
It's, I think the celebration, though, I think that's the thing that's just so wonderful in Luke 15, just how much rejoicing there is throughout the whole thing. And it's not a wild rumpus, right? It's not what you get up to where the wild things are.
Not debauched.
It is the real joy of fellowship and rejoicing. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. Good stuff, like I say, and really encouraging, and hopefully for everyone at home as well. Food for thought. And yeah, I'm sure it will hit differently depending exactly where people are at the moment. But yeah, and that's probably one of those passages as well that we've all heard, 100 times. But yeah, hopefully there's stuff in there which I think, drawing out new bits for people. Yeah. Maybe you've heard it with a different emphasis today, which is hopefully a good thing for us. So lovely.
Well, I'm off to go and buy you a copy of Where the Wild Things
Are. Clearly.
Your children are
There's
missing
a film of it,
out.
isn't there as well? Is it a film?
I wouldn't worry
Is it
about
not as
the film.
good? Not as good? No.
This is a thing. Just because it's a book doesn't need to be a film. That's it. That's it.
Fair enough. Right. Cool. All right then. Well, thanks so much, Nate. Everybody, thank you for joining us. I hope you found that encouraging. We'll be back. I always go to say we'll be back next week, and I literally have no idea whether we will.
I think we will be back.
We
next
probably
week.
will be back.
We shall see.
We'll see. I thought we were being waved at then, but Thomas was just stretching. So
yeah. Whether we'll be in the space station next week, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's true. Not sure what's going on with this set,
Definitely.
but we'll work it out. Guys, thanks for joining us. We hope you've been encouraged by that, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.